Hey everyone, and welcome into the new and improved Boiler Banter podcast. It's new, but I don't know that it's necessarily improved. For those of you that have been following along, though, first of all, thank you for your support and continuing to follow us along at Purdue on SI. But we've gone through this iteration probably a couple different times, and so this is the latest, just me, and it might be a little bit different here, especially in the summer months when it is the news is slim pickings, right? But we want to try to keep this thing consistent. And in the summer, again, when there's not a lot going on, when you're basically just kind of following recruiting and any updates that may come in terms of scheduling or whatever it might be, these might be some shorter episodes. So this is the first of the new edition of the Boiler Banter podcast. And again, we're just going to try to keep it consistent. And then, when we get closer to football season and obviously men's and women's basketball season, we'll probably try to do a few longer episodes when we got more things to banter about. So then as a precursor here, I'm going to apologize. It is allergy season and it's in full swing in the Midwest. So I'll try to keep the sniffles and the sneezes to a bare minimum, but bear with me on that front. So just a few updates that I wanted to provide here in terms of the Purdue men's basketball team on the recruiting front, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the other things. We got some shout outs to give here at the end, but so just a few things from I guess housekeeping items, if that's what you want to call them. But just a few things from the Purdue men's basketball side last week. One thing in particular was, and maybe, I don't know if this is the biggest news story, but Purdue did offer Kevin Savagae, a 5'10" point guard out of Marietta, Georgia, attends Wheeler High School. And for those not familiar with the Georgia geography, Marietta is just outside that Atlanta area. So a lot of good talent in that area. And he is a kid that is again, 5'10" point guard. When you look at the video, the film on him, and sometimes, again, this is I should specify, this is 2027. Both of these kids that I'm going to talk about are members of the 2027 class. So sometimes when it's that early in their career, sometimes there's a lot of video out there. Sometimes there's a lot of film. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes you got to get out and see these kids live. Obviously, with him being in Georgia, I haven't had a chance to get out and see him live, but we'll see if that changes here at some point in the near future. But based on what we've seen so far from him, he's a shifty point guard. He's got a good ability to take guys off the dribble, can really break guys down, but he's also got a really good jump shot, and especially from deep. So he has the ability to light it up from deep. I don't think he's not necessarily a score first point guard, more probably of a distributor. And I think probably a lot of times when you have a player in that 5'9", 5'10", 5'11", just kind of depends on who you ask in terms of his height. But when you have a player of that size, I think a lot at times, as you could probably, there's sirens going off in the background, so who knows what's going on outside. But when you have a player of that caliber, you probably tend to think Lewis Jackson, right? Like Lewis Jackson was a small point guard, shifty, was able to beat guys off the dribble, had really good passing skills, was able to get Purdue up in transition relatively quickly with his speed. I don't know if Kevin Savagae has that same sort of speed, quickness. Again, this is just based off the film I've seen, but he does have the ability to get guys off the dribble and get to the basket. And when in college basketball, and in order to make deep NCAA tournament runs and be competitive in the Big Ten, you've got to be able to get guys who can drive to the basket. As my dog Biscuit makes his first appearance on the Boiler Banter podcast, trying to get his face where he can. So that was kind of the first thing. He was, by my count, he's the second player that Purdue has offered during this recruiting cycle, the 2027 recruiting cycle. The other one being Jason Gardner Jr. out of Fisher. So two guys right now that Purdue has extended offers to. Again, it's really early in the recruiting process. Wouldn't expect any commitments from these guys anytime soon, but you never know, right? Like Luke Ertl, member of the 2026 class, was the guy who committed, I believe it was August of 2024, saw that offer, wanted to go to Purdue, wanted to play for Matt Painter, and took his first opportunity to do so. So you never know, but that was one of the updates from last week. And then over the weekend, an in-state kid, Isaiah Hill, a 6 foot. This is another one where the height kind of varies. 6'10", 6'11" center out of Pike High School. Is a kid that I was really impressed with. Again, this is another guy who's, you go through social media, you go through X, you go through YouTube, and you see that there's not a ton of film out there, but there's enough to kind of make some assumptions and kind of evaluate what he's able to do. And the first thing that stood out to me was he had really good movement, ability to cut without the ball for a guy of his size. Kind of comparable maybe a little bit to Juwan Johnson or even Matt Harms. I don't know that he does showcase the ability to shoot the deep ball. As we've seen, though, Matt Banter likes his bigs to tend to be in the post. We'll see how that works out with Daniel Jacobson. Daniel Jacobson, obviously a member of 7'4" kid who has played in just one game last season, essentially got hurt in the first minute of that second game. But he's a guy who can also step out behind the three-point line and knock down shots. He's got some range. He allowed Juwan Johnson to do that. Biggie Swanigan was another guy who could step out, A.J. Hammonds. So if they have that ability, Matt Painter usually gives them the green light. It may not be the most effective or efficient aspect of their game, but if they have the ability to stretch the defense a little bit and knock down those jump shots, they will sometimes get the green light, and Isaiah Hill might be that kind of player. He's been able to knock down shots. Again, I was most impressed with what he was able to do without the basketball, his movement without the basketball. And for somebody his size and somebody at 6'10", 6'11", who could probably dominate the high school game at that size, his ability and his willingness to move without the ball, not just be stapled down into the low block and on the post. I thought that really stood out. Some of his numbers from last season at Pike, about 13 rebounds per game, 8 rebounds, 3.5 blocks, which is among the best in the state. So, and again, sometimes it's hard to gauge how not necessarily the point and rebounding aspect of this, but the block shots, just because of the height. And you don't always see guys that can match that kind of 7-foot size at the high school level. So, but in terms of, just his knack defensively, like that's a guy that can go up and block shots, and another guy who can be a force on the defensive side. At least he has been so far. So, that's going to be an interesting thing. He recently took an unofficial visit, was not offered. At least to my knowledge, he hasn't been offered at this time, but a kid that took an unofficial visit to campus. And I think he is a player who could bring a lot to Purdue. There's going to be a lot of guys on him. And I should probably get to the rankings, the 24/7 sports rankings. Kevin Savagae, who we mentioned earlier, is a 4-star guard, one of the top 50 players in the class. Isaiah Hill doesn't have, I don't think he has, he's listed as a 3-star, one of the top 5 players in the 2027 class. So, those are going to be two guys I think keep an eye on. Those were the two updates we got. And, the other thing about Isaiah Hill was he was one of the guys selected to play in the Indiana Future All-Stars game, which is in early June. So he's got a lot of attention. He's considered one of the better players as an underclassman at the high school level. So just two names to kind of keep an eye on. Again, Savagae was offered by Purdue. I don't believe Hill has received an offer at this time, but he did take an unofficial visit to campus. So obviously there is some interest there. And then the third thing, and this is somewhat old news, I believe this happened last week, maybe over the weekend. It's confirmed that the number 1 player in the state of Indiana, Stephen Reynolds III, will not be continuing his high school career in Indiana. He was obviously at South Bend, Washington. This doesn't come as a huge surprise. He's going to move with his family down to Dallas, Texas. And you guys are probably familiar. Not only is he a target for the Purdue men's basketball team, but his 2 sisters, Mila and Amia, were both members of the Purdue women's basketball team. Kira, who is considered one of the top recruits, a 4-star prospect, one of the top recruits out of the state of Indiana, was committed to play at Purdue. Then their father, who had coached the South Bend, Washington girls basketball team for many years, got a job at UT on the UT Arlington staff with former Boiler Sharika Wright. So there's still some Purdue ties there. So the entire family is headed down to UT Arlington. And again, Stephen Reynolds will finish out his high school career there. So not a huge surprise, but when you see a 4-star kid and the number one player from the state of Indiana continuing his high school career elsewhere, I think that is something that's newsworthy and certainly worth mentioning, because he took a visit to Purdue last year. He's obviously familiar with the campus. And, another thing, according to zagsblog.com, he had a recent conversation about where he kind of stood with a bunch of different schools that had expressed interest and still had rave reviews for Purdue, and basically said that Matt Painter was on him early, wanted to get him on campus and extended an offer. And he understands that Matt Painter has an eye for talent and does a great job of developing his players. And so that's still an interest. Now, what I would say is it seems like they are the Reynolds family is very family oriented. So it would be interesting to see if he would come back to Indiana and play at Purdue, or if he would want to stay closer to home, his new home now in Dallas, Texas, and would, maybe play somewhere in the state there to be closer to his family. I don't know. I haven't been able to ask him yet, but those are just some things that have been happening on the recruiting front. So again, Purdue offers 2027 guard Kevin Savagae out of Marietta, Georgia, Isaiah Hill, a 6'10" forward center from Pike High School, took an unofficial visit to Purdue, and then Stephen Reynolds, a Purdue target in the 2026 class, and the number one player from Indiana, is going to finish his high school career in Texas. And then, again, like I said, I'm going to keep this as short and sweet as possible because there's not a lot happening. There's not a lot to debate, discuss, to banter about, if you will, not to use the title of the podcast too frequently. But we'll give some shout outs here to both the Purdue men's and women's golf team. They're headed to the NCAA championships. The Purdue women last week were able to punch their ticket to California, winning in a playoff. So they were tied, I believe, if I remember correctly, they were tied with Texas A&M and went to a playoff and were able to win in that playoff to get that 5th spot. The Purdue men's team just finished up this week, and they were in 6th place heading into the final round, and top 5 advanced to the NCAA championships, and they were able to move up 2 spots. They finished 4th, and so they were able to punch their ticket to California as well. So really, really cool that both of those teams are able to compete in the NCAA championships, and we'll see what happens. In those regionals, those home teams, they get to play on their home course, right? So when you're hosting it, the familiarity helps you out a little bit, but out in California, it's going to be a little bit different because this is going to be a new course to virtually everybody. So it'll be interesting to see how both the women's and men's golf team do out there. So huge shout out to those two programs. And then we'll also give a shout out to the Purdue softball team. They were able to sneak in. I was there last week covering the Big Ten softball tournament. They were able to sneak in as the number 12 seed, and then just cause havoc as the 12th seed. They were able to reach the semifinal round, the first time in Big Ten softball tournament history that the 12 seed had advanced that far in the tournament. They did so by beating Northwestern 4-2 in a thrilling game, and then they upset Ohio State, the number 4 seed, 14-6, just laid it thick on the Buckeyes in that second game, and then fell short against Michigan, who would go on to win the Big Ten tournament. Fell short in that one 4-2. But, one of the things that kind of stood out in that was not only how well Purdue played defensively, and then they got the bats heating up in that second game, obviously against Ohio State. But I think you give a lot of credit to Julia Gassett, who in that first game accounted for 3 of Purdue's 4 RBIs, had 2 home runs, threw over 150 pitches, and got the win. And she ended the tournament then with 3 home runs, and was just outstanding throughout the entire tournament. So shout out to them. Deep run. They had thought that they had maybe done enough with wins over Northwestern and Ohio State, 2 NCAA tournament teams, to maybe sneak in and get an at-large bid in the NCAA softball tournament. They were instead one of the first 4 teams out. So they weren't able to carry any of that momentum. It wasn't quite enough. Needed a couple more wins during the regular season to get that bid. But, it's still a valiant effort, great performances. And, the exciting thing is, if you're a Purdue softball fan, is they are returning a lot of their team. Now, we'll see what happens in terms of the transfer portal, because you never know in today's age. But on paper, and in terms of the class that they have, this is a team that's returning a lot of their talent from last season. So the future is bright if they're able to, retain a lot of those players. So, we'll see what happens. But those were the updates we had. These summer episodes, unless we're able to get on a guest or unless there's some huge breaking news, these are probably going to be shorter episodes, which I'm sure is fine with everybody. You don't need to hear me droning on and on for an hour nonstop. But just want to, again, thank you for listening in, tuning in. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out on Twitter. Shoot me an email, story ideas, mailbag questions, anything we can do through these summer months to kind of get through until we get closer to football. And then obviously a lot of hype and excitement about the men's basketball season coming up in the 2025-26. So again, I'm Dustin Schutte. Thanks for joining into this Boiler Banter episode, and I will talk to you again next week.